a special shout out to Ash UK or RGV, as that's his handle on Twixter, for sharing this. This is the kind of thing that NIO, especially the co-founders, sometimes what they'll do is give us these little teasers, these little morsels, uh, so that we can get an idea of what's happening without them actually coming out and giving us all the information. So, for example, if we see 50,000 delivered by NIO in both November and December, then that puts NIO over 1 million cumulative deliveries all time by the end of the year. Obviously, this is something they're wanting to do or they wouldn't be talking about it. So shout out to Ash for sharing that with us. I also wanted to go and point this out kind of in tandem with it, because the expansion for NIO globally is quietly going on at the same time they're ramping production and deliveries in China. So not only are they doing well and improving within the most important market in the globe for them, that is China, but they're also doing things outside of China. Love seeing that. Along with this, I want to share this. This is a teaser a little bit, and I don't think we're going to get the full scale breakdown from NIO until they're ready for it. This is the actual video that was referenced in that tweet, but this is a nod to NIO. I believe they are the leader in the autonomous driving space, and I think a big part of the reason is the safety, which kind of comes back to the focus of the co-founders, but also Ren Xiaoqing, who has a unique equity position that no one outside of the co-founders, I don't think, has for NIO. I shared that in a previous video. I can't remember which one, or I would link it here, but it is, you can find it in the annual SEC filings if you want. This is also the other thing, and this is really kind of a note to the NIO longs, especially those who have been here long-term, who are looking long-term, as I am. At the bottom of the screen on the ticker, I have the first major growth phases NIO identified, or the way I reference it or phrase it is a market awareness. The brand and the brands now for NIO, with 3 of them, need to be known, not just in China, but globally. And so here is a simple indicator to see where NIO is. If we look at NIO on this platform with just 235,000 followers compared to a much more mature company that is not as well positioned in China, the most important market. And obviously NIO has advantages that it can take, along with it, with things like the power swap stations and the battery as a service. And yet, the comparison of NIO with just 235,000 followers versus Tesla with over 24 million, it's a nod to how early it still is. And so I'll talk stock price action here in just a second, because I also wanted to do this comparison. You've got William Li, the CEO for NIO, with just over 6,500 followers on this platform, compared it to, again, somebody who's obviously a lot better known with over 200 million followers. So it is still such an early stage for NIO. And no, they're not profitable yet. That's the second major growth phase that I've got. But I think we're still going to be in this first major growth phase market awareness for a while, probably right through NIO becoming profitable. So now let's talk stock price. And this is, I want to shift gears and go real short term now, because what we've seen is, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We'll talk about the move that was made from July. This is that move. So obviously an uptrend since then, but I want to drill down even more and kind of hone in on just the dilution point, which was much more recent in September, right here. And look at what's happened, and what I'm feeling or seeing, especially if we look at the trade volume here at the bottom, which has been very, very low. NIO seems to be consolidating above the $7 range. And so I'm just wondering, with such low trade volume, for example, today, and it's Wednesday, November 5th, we're about a half hour left in the trade day. As I record this, there's your date and timestamp. Not even 30 million shares traded, and yet NIO is positive 2% plus on the day. And as I said, it just feels like a lot of this such low volume, but the price is not being taken down. And as for FTDs, we probably won't get new data until the government shutdown is over. That's my guess. And I don't know how trailing it will be even at that point, but I don't know if it matters, because NIO is obviously maintaining, this $7+ value with the stock price. And if you then consider the price point of Tesla, it just seems ridiculous to see we are where we are, except for when you start factoring in, the reality of things like NIO being an IDE, an innovative driven enterprise. I'll link that video, by the way, if you haven't seen it, because that also plays into why we see certain companies like NVIDIA, Tesla, Amazon, Netflix, Apple, so many over the course of time, have a low price point and then eventually rocket. And so, once again, now if we shift back to the big picture view or overview and look at the full history of NIO, we've seen that even before NIO was profitable, it already made a parabolic move to the upside. And so I don't know if that will ultimately, in the long term, end up contributing more price action to the upside for this company and this stock. We're living in crazy times where hype masquerades as value some of the times. And so with a company that really has, the underlying business model with the strength to get to profitability on its own, not needing government subsidies, not dependent on some of these things that, let's say, Tesla needed and Elon needed to get that company to profitability. I just think it's really hard to, especially at this point, try and predict long-term stock price action. But it's also really hard to ignore some of the positives if we can shift and kind of step away and look at this from a big picture standpoint. So I'm excited to see what this company has. And I think 2026 could be a year of fireworks, of a lot of exciting things. However, I also don't really know what to expect with the markets. And even within the US, things are very crazy here in the US. And we could have a lot of shifting and things changing even within the next couple of years. So, with that in mind, I don't know how much or how little that will affect NIO. What I will say is within the very short term, it seems like with sentiment being very quiet and subdued for NIO stock, and yet NIO, continuing with very low volume to be sort of consolidating above the $7 level, I can't really get full on bearish because, even though we're maybe not seeing a big breakthrough to the upside with NIO stock, the price point, especially the stock price action and the price point in the short term, you just can't ignore it. It's what it is. And I'll actually pull this back out. So, again, just from July, over the last few years, which is what it took the big money to take the stock price down to about the $3, and sub $4 levels, they needed elevated FTDs for years, and they took advantage of very low trade volume. So now that we're seeing this trade volume really drop off, and yet the stock price remains in this $7 plus level or range, I guess I really just have a couple of thoughts, and I'll probably close the video after these thoughts. One is, if I wanted to do sort of a bear thesis versus the bull thesis, then I would kind of revert to my view of, well, bears can probably keep this thing from really popping and going crazy to the upside, through the end of the year, 2025. I think it gets really dangerous and tricky for them once NIO does their full year earnings, especially if quarter four ends up showing profits. But that probably won't be reported until March of 2026. Maybe NIO will, move that up to an earlier date. I would frankly love to see that and see what might happen with the stock price if they do. But if they stick with the same cadence they've done the last few years, I expect that earnings to be probably in March, which means from the bear thesis standpoint or view, perhaps bears will keep this thing somewhat, subdued, let's say. And we won't see any crazy, fireworks to the upside stock price action even into the end of the year, especially if we continue to have just such a quiet, subdued sentiment. But if that changes, and if people, especially if the analysts, start waking up or realizing that NIO is growing into a giant, and this may happen much faster than maybe what they're expecting, then I do think it gets compelling and interesting. And I think it'll be really easy for us to see this happen and take shape in the short term with the stock price action, because I think we'll see some obvious big moves up. And I don't think, I think we'll see more of this kind of thing, I guess, to keep it simple. This is pretty easy when you just look at it. And then when you factor in the research that I've been doing and tracking things over the last few years, and this low trade volume would normally signal, based on the several year bearish sentiment and the downtrend that NIO stock was in, you would think that bears would be, or shorts would be, taking the stock price down, and they're not. So, my thinking is the bullish side is folks in Wall Street figure it out before the end of the year, and we'll see that obviously reflected in the stock price moving up, and maybe up very aggressively, as we've seen NIO has the potential to do. I don't know. Just wanted to do a video and offer a few of these thoughts, a little bit longer video, but I hadn't done a lot of content lately. And I also wanted to do share a few of these things, but also sort of a, the short term versus the long term and big picture, or the long term view remains my main focus, especially with all the research that I do. But I wanted to offer this because I know there are other NIO longs, and it's an interesting time. It's a very exciting time for those who are true longs, especially those who have been through the ups and the downs. So anyway, let me wrap this video. And because I went over 8 minutes, I will create chapters or timestamps to make it a little more convenient for you. Thanks for sticking around to the end, because I know some of you did. Have a great day or night whenever you see this. I'll see you all again very soon.